Today, your lesson is going to be recorded and played for you by my substitute. We're going to be talking about rounding decimals. After we do rounding decimals, you're going to be reminded of our saying, find your number, look right next door. 4 or less, just ignore. 5 or more, add 1 more. You are going to be able to place a number on a number line and determine, based on its rounding rule, which direction you're going to round to. The first thing we must do is find our number. If we look at the hundredths place and we underline the 5, we're going to look right next door, and that tells me that this decimal is closer to 38.26. Depending on where we round that number to will determine what its rounded answer is. You can use a number line to help you round to different place value positions. Let's say that a sea cucumber lives below the surface of the ocean at a depth of 2 726 of a kilometer. If we round that depth to the nearest tenth and to the nearest hundredth, let's decide what each one rounds to. I'm going to use the space off to the side to first be able to find my number, look right next door. We are going to decide which 2/10 our number lies between. Then we're going to be able to plot each number on the number line based on what it rounds to. If we start with our first direction and we round it to the nearest tenth, find your number, look right next door. I know that that 2 does not affect the 7. My rounded answer is 2 7/10. Remember, whatever place value position you're rounding to will be the place value position that you name. If we take that same decimal and we round it to the nearest hundredth, find your number, look right next door. That 6 tells me to round my 2, so my answer is 2 73/100. Remember, the place value position you round it to will be the name that you give that place value position. You will see that each of these are located on your number line by saying this decimal rounded to the nearest tenth is 2.7, but when rounded to the nearest hundredth, it's 2.73. As we look at each decimal place, the most important thing to remember is to find the place number and then look right next door. If I look at the place value position in the hundredths and look right next door, I know that that 9 tells me to round up. I now have 1 3/100. Number 2 says round to the nearest tenth. Find your number, look right next door. 7 tells me to round 1 up. I now have 12 5/10. If we want to round to the nearest whole number, the whole number is going to be the first place value position to the left of the decimal. If I look right next door and I use the first decimal place, I know that I'm going to add 1 more to my nearest whole number to make my whole number 22. Remember, you do not need to include the decimal behind any whole number, especially when rounding. We know they're there even if we don't see them. Number 4, round to the nearest hundredth. Find your number, look right next door. Since my digit that I've circled right next door is 4 or less, I'm going to ignore that number in the hundredths place and leave it alone as 345 27/100. Here again we have to the nearest whole number, number 5. Find the number to the left of your decimal. Use the first decimal to determine whether or not you're going to ignore that digit or round up. I know that that 2 does not affect my number. I now have 10,463. To the nearest tenth on number 6. Everything to the left of your decimal where you are going to round will stay the same. 7, 0, 4, 5. The tenths place is going to be determined by the digit that you circled, and since it's 4 or less, we're going to leave it a 6. 7,045 and 6/10. If we're looking at car racing times and they're measured to the nearest thousandth of a second, the time it takes 10 cars to make one lap around a short track is going to be shown. If we sort these, rounding to the nearest second, we're going to use the nearest second as the whole number. Find each whole number, underline the digit to the left of your decimal place, and we are going to categorize them into boxes based on what whole number they round to. The first one, I'm going to leave my digit 15. Since there's an 8 next door on car number 2, I'm going to add one more to my whole number. It also becomes 15. Car 3, there is a 4 in the tenths place. That car is going to remain at 16 seconds. 15, since the zero's behind, will stay the same for car number 4. The 8 determines that 15 needs to add one more. Car number 5 becomes 16. As you look at the remainder of the cars, think about what that digit does to the whole number when rounding to the nearest second. As we look at categorizing each of these cars, what are some things that you see that we could now group them by? We can group them by cars that score in 15 seconds, those that score in 14 seconds, and those that score in 16 seconds. If we look, car 6 and car 8 fall under category 14 seconds. Car 1, 2, 4, and 10 fall under the 15-second category, and those that remain, 3, 5, 7, and 9, all represent the cars that could run at 16 seconds per one lap. If we have a longer track, and a driver's lap time was 28.266 seconds, how could we label it with tick marks? Well, let's use the bottom of our page here to think about 28 as a whole number would be on the left. 29 would be a whole number on the right. All of my tick marks fall in between, and I know that 28.5 is the halfway mark. If we look at finding 28.266 seconds, I know that it is going to fall in the left-hand side, because if I put in my placeholders, 266 is less than 500. If we think about a speed rounded to the nearest thousandth, let's take the car that raced 96.479 miles per hour and round it to the nearest thousandth. How can we round to the nearest thousandth without any digits? Remember that there is a placeholder behind any digit that we don't see, just like we have in the whole numbers out front. If we take that decimal and we round to a different place value position, let's say we round to the nearest hundredth. Find your number, look right next door. I know that these digits in front of my rounded place will stay the same, but this 9 tells me to add one more. I can put in an empty place value position, but it does not change the value of the digit that I rounded. If another professional race car driver sped in a race at 212 and 809 thousandths mile per hour, how could I find this to the nearest hundredth, the nearest tenth, and the nearest whole number? Well, let's use some different colors. The first one we're going to do is the nearest hundredth. Find your number, look right next door. That is going to be rounded to 212 and 81 hundredths. With or without that placeholder, it does not change the value of your rounded digit. If we look at the nearest tenth, find your number, look right next door. That does not change the value, so our rounded answer to the nearest tenth is 212 and 8 tenths. You can place two placeholders behind that digit. It does not change the value of the tenths place. And if we look at our whole number, find your number, look right next door. The 8 tells me that I must round my whole number up 1, so that race car would race at 213 miles per hour, knowing that with a decimal, with placeholders, it does not change the value of my whole number. Today, your rotations are going to consist of task cards and slides, more practice, and your IXL skills.